excited to welcome a person who's been here all her life. Jean Schuler is a West Bank resident, lives on Buckeye. She has her mother with her, who has been on, who has lived in several different places, including Rollingwood in the West Bank area. She has 4 sisters who are also in this area. So long time, very involved Westlake family. You graduated in the class of 78 with Robert.
78th grade.
That sounds like a class motto. And she is an author and an incredible illustrator. Can't wait for you to see her artwork. In fact, one of her newest projects is, after becoming familiar with this group, she wants to illustrate the history or the story of the Robert Eanes family migrating from Mississippi to Texas for our 2nd grade history tours. So we are really excited to see what that might end up being, because it will be a great addition and a great way for the kids to add to their knowledge of the story of their school district. She wanted me to be sure and let you know that she was inspired to start in art and develop her art by somebody a lot of you will know, Doris Walcott. Is that a name that sounds familiar? She'll probably talk about Doris.
Yeah, I can talk about Doris a little bit. She was big inspiration, but we'll get into that.
And she was in Doris's art class in what was the original Eanes Chapel building that is still being used for art classes on the Eanes Elementary campus today. So the oldest surviving building that I know of in our district from 1928 is where she received her inspiration. So I'm going to turn it over to Jean Schuler, who will share with us a wonderful holiday story based on research and art and culinary inspiration from the presidents.
Right.
That had lived.
This little that, yeah. Yeah. So when Ellen asked me, I don't know, 6 months ago, if I would talk about LBJ's Christmas, I wasn't sure I had that much to talk about just about his Christmas, which gave me the idea just to take the Christmas info out of the book that I wrote, and I'll get more into that when we talk about LBJ. But I realized that there were actually 4 presidents in Texas. Now, Eisenhower is number 1. People don't really realize that, or it's like, no. But Eisenhower, 34th president, was born in Denison, Texas. He died of heart failure in 1969. He was only 78 years old. So that was 34th president. And then we had LBJ, the 36th president. You'll hear the most about him because I know the most about him. And then we have George H.W. Bush, 41st president. And then, of course, we have George W., the 43rd, Bush 43. So he was 2001, 2009. So we actually have 4 Texas presidents. And I like to find something kind of funny or something about the presidents that is not just standard stuff when you would go to the museum and see it, or something you would read about in the press, which is how I got interested in LBJ, because I volunteered at the LBJ library for about 4 or 5 years. And then COVID came and it shut down, and it was closed for a really long time because it was a federal call when it could open up again. And it was closed for months. So at that point, I transitioned to doing different things. My mom had a stroke 5 years ago, so I started helping my mom. She's here back. But that's the time that I did find to put this book together. I was talking to a friend of mine since 1st grade, Robert DePue in the front row, about he's working on a project. I said, it took me maybe close to 10 years because I had to start this, put it down, do something else, move to another city. I mean, it was just crazy. But if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. So I think this book was meant to be because I kept finding funny things about LBJ that I wanted to share with people. And my earliest, when I was 11, my earliest memory of LBJ, and I used to tell people this at the front desk when I volunteered at the library, they would ask me why volunteer here? There's lots of places in Austin you can volunteer. I said, well, when I was 11, I remember going to the ranch with some friends, and we pulled over to the side of the road, and we were looking at the longhorn grazing, and then someone said, like, look down the road, LBJ is coming. Like there's this big cloud of dust, and he just kind of right past us. But I was just staring at him, and of course, I think he looked at me and tipped his head. I think that was for the whole crowd there, right? But I mean, I was really zeroed in on it. So I was so impressed about that when I got home, I had my special little stationery. I decided I was going to write him a letter. So I wrote this letter, which I'll read to you. But part of my amazement as a volunteer at the library was I was talked to an archivist one day, and I had started looking up recipes a little bit up in the library because there wasn't hardly anything in the store. And as far as recipes go. And I said, what all is up there? Because they told us during training like 45 or 60 million pieces of paper or something like that. And she said, yeah, they saved pretty much everything. And I said, well, I wrote him a letter when I was 11. Okay, this is 50 years later. I'm telling her this story. And she said, well, she asked me just a few questions. 20 minutes later, I swear she disappeared on the elevator, came back and had my original little letter.
Wow.
So, I mean, she handed it to me, made a copy. And I mean, I almost started crying. I couldn't believe it. It said, I wrote, Dear Mr. Johnson, my name is Jean Schuler. I live in Austin. I'm 11 years old. I was so thrilled Sunday when I saw you in your green Ford. You are a smart, lucky man. You have beautiful land, Longhorn, and a beautiful house. I've seen your birthplace. Please write me back so I have something to brag about. So I did get this in the mail. And then there was a padded kind of thick envelope, which you don't get when you're 11 years old. At least I never got a padded envelope. And so this is probably, he had a bunch of secretaries probably that pumped this stuff out. But I did talk to Mark Optegrove at the library at LBJ, and he said he thinks maybe he really signed it back then. But that might really be his initials, but whatever. But he wrote, Dear Jean, this engraving of the ranch is sent as a little souvenir of your visit our way. Is a small thank you for a nice letter. I am lucky, and even more so today because you took the time to write me. So that was August 26, 1971. So that was my glue to LBJ. Mm-hmm. And then I continued, this is engraving of the ranch. I continued my research at the library, looking up recipes, and I was always surprised that there weren't more in the store, but they just didn't exist. There was a postcard for Pertinalis chili. So I did research, and as I was researching, I found funny little things about LBJ that I just hadn't read anywhere or seen anywhere. He was a little off the cuff, a little. But so those things got my attention, and so I started telling stories. I tell my friends these stories and these letters I'd come across. So I have a few marked. So I'll show you a little bit more in here about the book, and then we'll back up and we'll talk about the Texas presidents. Okay, so this is on page 6 of my book, if anybody is interested. 46-year-old Lyndon Johnson had his first heart attack when he was serving as a hardworking Senate Majority Leader. The news that Lyndon was in Maryland's Bethesda Naval Hospital in critical condition shouldn't have come as a huge surprise. LBJ smoked incessantly. I heard he smoked all day, never stopped. Drank loads of 6-shooter coffee, which is really heavy coffee. There's a recipe for 6-shooter coffee in the book. It's a funny one too. Ate heavy meals and had an expanding waistline. He carried 220 pounds on his 6-foot frame. So obviously he survived. He became president 8 years later. He left the hospital weighing 175 pounds and on a strict diet. His goal was to reduce cholesterol and lose weight. He had to quit his smoking cigarettes under doctor's orders. Upon hearing the news, he blurted out to the doctor, Doc, I just as soon have my pecker cut off. And I just kept finding things like that. So anyway, he really did not fix me. When Lady Bird came around, he cleaned his act up real fast, but he really didn't. And then let's see. Which page was I going to read you? He had this thing too where he always ate. He was always eating off other people's plate. You go to he was at a party, he would just stand over a thing of shrimp and just demolish the whole bowl. And I just read all these crazy things about him. And then when he was vice president, at that point, he'd almost, given up being president. But he said he wrote this letter once, or this to Claire Booth, and she was asking about how why he decided he would be number 2 on the ticket when he really wanted to be number 1. And LBJ said, Claire, I looked it up. 1 out of every 4 presidents died in office. I'm a gambling man, darling. This is the only chance I got. So it's John Tyler, Bill Moore, Andrew Johnson, Chester Arthur, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, and Harry Truman. They died in office, and he looked that up, figured out his odds, and said, he was a gambling man, which he was a gambling man. So that was part of his thought behind that. And when Lady Bird wasn't around, he would just eat anything he wanted. I mean, he was just not on a diet, but he was always on a diet. And one time his chef, Zephyr Wright, the personal chef to the Johnsons, she always cooked what LBJ wanted. And then he was in the hospital, had a heart attack, doctor's orders. She cleaned up a lot of the recipes. Instead of using like heavy cream, she would use milk. And anyway, she really tried to help clean it up. But she said to him, she said, Mr. President, you've been my boss for a number of, she wrote this and gave it to him because she was getting mad at him because he complained about this diet food. Mr. President, you've been my boss for a number of years. You always tell me what you want to lose weight, but you never do very much to help yourself. Now I'm going to be your boss for a change. Eat what I put in front of you. Don't complain anymore. She left that on his table. And the next night, the Johnson was hosting a diplomatic reception, and our conversation with Senator William Fulbright, who had expressed the fear that we are succumbing to the arrogance of power. The president has denied that assertion and said, a man can hardly have an arrogance of power when he gets a note from his cook. Talking him up like this, and he pulls Zephyr's note from his pocket and reads aloud. If and when I feel arrogance of power, Zephyr takes it right out of me. Okay, then so I read a lot of books when I was writing this book. There's one called Lyndon, an Oral Biography. And George Christensen wrote, he said, LBJ would be talking. Maybe he'd reach over and get somebody else's butter. I remember on the press plane coming back from Australia to Manila from the Manila conference in 1966. The Prime Minister of New Zealand and his wife flew back with them. They're all having breakfast in the cabin of the plane with some of the press around. And Lyndon just absentmindedly reached over and ate a piece of bacon right off the plate of the Prime Minister's wife. The press got a hold of it and blew it up, almost made an international incident out of it.
Oh, gosh.
And he goes on to say, that was just him. If somebody was sitting right next to him and eating ice cream, and he was on his diet half the time, he craved sweets, he'd just get a spoon, reach over there and start eating it like a kid. So there's a lot about that, about LBJ, and I just thought it was hilarious. So that kind of got me going on my book. And then I have a Christmas section that talks about what LBJ preferred for Christmas and Lady Bird. And they, like all the presidents we'll see, they really did it up with the food. These are the pages. This talks a little bit about LBJ's Christmas, and the Christmas, the trees they had in the different rooms, and Lady Bird went over her menu. People always asked her, she said, about getting letters in the mail about what's the menu in the White House this year, which sounds like something I'd write. But she said favorites always were oyster cocktail, roast turkey with giblet gravy, cornbread dressing, beans with toasted almonds, Bibb lettuce salad, cranberry sauce, homemade sweet rolls, homemade fruitcake, eggnog, and ambrosia. And she always made her famous Texas pralines, and she would bring those to the White House. And then she had them like by the handful in her pocket, and so did LBJ, and they gave them out to the senators. But they were very popular, the whole Texas style, and the entertaining in Texas along the Pertinalis River. LBJ, Lady Bird did a lot of that. They invited a lot of diplomats down. They had big barbecues. And LBJ was prankster there too. I don't know if you've been there. They still have it, this amphibious vehicle. And he put his important friends in it, start driving around the ranch and look at the Longhorn. And then he'd head right down to the Pertinalis River. And then he'd start pumping the brakes and start swearing, no brakes, no brakes. And having people right. And then he'd go right into it and then he'd float. And they would get so mad at him and yell at him. And I think a couple of people jumped out. There were a few photos I saw, like guys in suits and ties, just swamped. So he was a really funny guy. Lady Bird definitely, she said she was his third eye. She definitely was. She kept him in control the best she could. He would get mad at people, yell at him, tell them they're fired, storm out. He was just ruthless. And then she'd go find him and say, oh, no, honey, that's just LBJ. We don't want you to not work here anymore. And she'd smooth it all up and then, they'd be back. So she was, I gained a lot of respect for her. And then somebody already mentioned, when you look at the Texas wildflowers and the wildflower center and how she cleaned up the highways. And she did a lot for Texas, in a lot of ways. So that's a little bit about the Johnsons. I have a little bit more, but I thought I would read you some stuff about, and just kind of back up now to Eisenhower, because what I read about Mammy was just hilarious. I thought she was really into pink, everything pink. So when Mammy Eisenhower was ready to celebrate, okay, we have to back up now. This is 1953. There's television sets glowing in living rooms across America. Pastel colors are taking over households. The Eisenhowers have just moved into the White House, and Christmas is about to sparkle like never before. Pink was Mammy's signature color, and her decorations followed that theme. She had pastel ornaments, glittering garland, coordinating wrapping paper, table setting. She helped popularize the mid-century American tinsel, aluminum trees, matching decor, and it just spread across the country. She was, and one thing I read about her, she was a sparkle factory. She loved pastel pink so much that America literally named the shade after her, Mammy Pink. The bathrooms across the country were drowning in pink tiles. We had a pink bathroom in Rollingwood with pink tile. Tiles, tubs, towels, everything. In the 50s was Mammy Pink. That was the end thing. She was also famous, I thought funny. She was famous for her bangs, perfectly rolled, curled, gravity-defying bangs that looked like they were engineered by NASA before NASA even existed. Legend has it soldiers overseas clipped her hairstyle out of magazines for luck. It's reminded them of home. She adored Christmas. She decorated like she was personally trying to guide Santa's sleigh with sheer sparkle. Maxed out tinsel, ornaments, like I already said. The whole White House was just a big sparkle ball. She was known for being funny and warm in a gentle way and extremely loyal. I called her his sweetheart for life. She kept things running at home when Ike ran the country. And if the White House ever had a first lady of glitter, it was Mammy. So this is kind of a cute story about how Mammy and I met, because they met at a dinner party, a Christmas dinner party. She was 19 and Ike was 25. He was a Lieutenant Dwight David Eisenhower. They met at a dinner party when he was stationed at Fort Sam Houston. He saw her across the room, a lovely, charming, sparkling young woman. He was immediately hooked. Okay, so was George H.W. with Barbara. Same story. Friends say the two were opposites in the most perfect ways. Mammy was social, warm, and loved hosting. Ike was disciplined, serious, and laser focused on a military career. They balanced each other like a pair they'd been waiting to meet. They were engaged on Valentine's Day in 1916. Ike gave her a miniature West Point ring, a symbol that she was now part of his world. They married that July, beginning a lifelong partnership built on devotion, humor, and shared stubbornness. Did Mammy like being the first lady? Well, mostly yes. She loved being a wife, a hostess, and the stabilizing force. She liked making the White House feel cozy and approachable. She adored the staff, took pride in her role, and enjoyed meeting people. But she also added privacy, routines in her household order. She didn't love politics or speeches, but what kept her grounded was Ike. The two were inseparable, and she felt it was her job to make the job possible. Mammy made the White House shimmer. She didn't try to change the world. She changed it with warmth and hospitality. Her famous recipes are her $1 billion blueberry pie. She made a cheesecake that apparently everyone loved, and she served at a lot of luncheons. And there's actually the library, Eisenhower Library, has done a really good job putting a lot of her stuff online. And, just like this is on the old paper. Mm-hmm. This is eggnog. And then, of course, we can't forget Mammy's fudge. When I was researching, I found a lot of recipes that, or a lot of things that Mammy for fudge, which I don't know if I'm going to make it. I probably won't, because it takes 5 cups of sugar. My mother loves sweets. She doesn't probably eat it, but that kind of does me, and that's just the beginning of it. So the Eisenhowers spent Christmas at Camp David. Eventually, they had 5 grandkids that would come to Camp David, and they loved to go sledding and play in the snow. And they had the traditional turkey dressing, kind of what I read Lady Bird had. Shrimp cocktail. I mean, they had really nice meal, but their glimmer there was when the grandkids could be with them. They really loved that. So that's just with Mammy. I just want to tell you about the pink. That's where this whole pink thing came from. And let's see, I want to tell you now about George H.W. Bush, which couldn't believe such a similar story as Eisenhower's. He was 17, she was 16. They met at a Christmas dance in 1941. And George said she wore a dress that made her look like a Christmas tree. They talked and danced and began a love story that lasted 73 years.
Was that a good thing?
I'm not sure.
How did I?
George was gentle, thoughtful, optimistic. Barbara was witty, sharp, comforting, and commanding. Together they teased one another constantly, laughed often, created one of the most enduring partnerships in presidential history. Barbara could deliver loving rose with grandmother charm. She once said, "I married the first man I ever kissed, and I told my children, don't do that." She had warmth, honesty, and quick wit that made everyone feel at home. George loved his colorful socks, adored skydiving on his birthdays, writing heartfelt letters, and later in life, the brightest socks ever. There's a whole bunch in his library. In Aggie Land, there is the George H. Bush Library, and it's got a lot of his socks. They raised 6 children, future President George W., Governor Jeb. They lost their daughter Robin, age 3, which tragically deepened their bond for life. Barbara ran the White House with humor and order, sporting her iconic pearls and championed literacy. George wrote emotional notes, snuck treats to the dog, and approached the presidency with genuine kindness and optimism. So the thing about George, some of you may already know this, his Christmas card list was out of control. 30,000 cards.
Whoa.
He let's see. Let me find they spent Christmas at Camp David, but they worked on the card. The volunteers worked on the cards all year. He had a holiday operation so massive it could have been its own federal program. His Christmas card list was over 30,000, turning a simple tradition into months-long projects that began in the spring and stretched into February or March. Everyone received the cards. The list included friends, waiters, hairdressers, political allies, neighbors, acquaintances, even Queen Elizabeth. And his longtime chief of staff joked, and everyone in between, they got the same card. So in the 1980s, when this started, volunteers spent their summers and falls addressing the envelopes by hand. Bush started the practice as vice president and expanded it when he became president. If any cards were returned, the staff had to make the investigation to find out where the cards should have gone, and not one was forgotten. When the Bush family left Connecticut, George graduated from Yale and made a pact never lose touch with people that cared about him, that he cared about. Barbara kept a file card system stored in a wooden library, 16 drawers, to track everyone they met. Their philosophy was simple. If someone was ever your friend, they stayed your friend. Barbara maintained the list. Her system kept the enormous list running smooth year after year. And then I thought about Millie the dog. And I thought this was kind of funny. And I put some stuff, I have to admit, this is partly AI. I put some stuff in the computer and I thought this was pretty funny what it came up with. So this is Millie the dog tells all Christmas memoir. Millie the dog, first dog in the United States, retired, still fabulous. Chapter 1. I was born ready for Christmas. Humans think Christmas is for them. Wrong. It's for dogs, especially me. Chapter 2, Camp David, my winter kingdom. When the Bush family arrived each December, I took immediate control. When the humans were unpacking, I performed critical national security sniffing. Chapter 3, Barbara Bush, keeper of the cookies. Barbara thought she hid Christmas cookies from me. She did not. Chapter 4, George H.W. Bush, my personal Santa. Every year he dressed as Santa. Every year I pretended not to know it was him. I acted his surprise just to boost his morale. Chapter 5, White House decorations, my review. Tinsel, delicious. Garland, also delicious. Ornaments, too tempting. I mean, I may or may not have arranged just a few. Chapter 6, Bush family chaos. I'm the supervisor. Grandkids were screaming with joy. Wrapping paper was everywhere. I sat in the middle of the queen, like the queen of Christmas. Chapter 7, presidential Christmas card fiasco. Hundreds of thousands of cards. I don't know. What a waste of time. I could have signed them with one paw stamp. Chapter 8, my favorite Christmas tradition. At the end of the night, Barbara would scratch me behind my ears and say, well done, Millie. I live for that. Chapter 9, final thoughts from a first dog. Christmas isn't about presents, cookies, or even presidential pajama sets. It's about being together, making a mess, and loving your pact, and snatching a gingerbread man when no one is looking. there was a Christmas tree in the White House bushes. And in the book, I have the letter about, sorry, that's my phone. I thought I turned it off. I guess not. Thanks, Suzanne. Sorry, everybody, about that. But the Johnsons had gingerbread men made and put on a tree. See, I'm going back to the Johnsons. I'm sorry, losing track here. But I know so much more about them. And they had this tree that had gingerbread boys on it, and they would have orphans come to the White House for a Christmas party. And one year they put the gingerbread boys back up every year. A lot of them were missing arms and legs and had teeth marks in them. So Bess Abel, the press secretary, always was ordering more gingerbread boys for these Christmas trees in the White House, because the kids would come through and nibble little arms and legs off. So from HW, we have George and Laura. And we also have a version from Barney about his Christmas. It's kind of funny, like Millie's. The Georgian Christmas in the George W. Bush White House had a rhythm, equal parts of Texas warmth, presidential ceremony, and Laura Bush's signature sense of hospitality. Every December, the White House is transformed into a glowing holiday home that mixes formal tradition with the Bush's family's simple, down-to-earth Christmas values. So from what I read, okay, Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird, very down-to-earth. George and Laura, very down-to-earth. They weren't either one into like this whole mammy spot thing. For the Bushes, the season began right after Thanksgiving when Laura unveiled the official White House Christmas theme. She loved themes, everything from all things beautiful, bright and beautiful, to a season of stories. And she approached decorating the White House like a curator. She worked with dozens of volunteers, walking through the state floor with a list and a vision, choosing the trees for each room, the ornaments connected to American history, and even the types of greenery that would line the mantles. The results were always elegant and peaceful, very Laura Bush-like. On the other hand, George W. loved people to be part of his season. He enjoyed the annual unveiling of the gigantic blue room Christmas tree, usually making lighthearted jokes, shaking the hands of the delivery crew, ensuring everyone was appreciated. Throughout December, he and Laura hosted more than a dozen Christmas receptions. They had military families, staff, diplomats, children's groups, the press come through, which the Johnsons did that too. George was warm, relaxed, and at his best in casual conversation. He always teased the photographers, hugged the kids, take a moment for the White House staff, especially those who work behind the scene. The Bushes preserved quiet tradition. Laura always made sure the library glowed with soft lights and bowls of holiday candles. George kept his habit of early morning workouts. Even on Christmas, he'd ride his bike. Barney and Miss Beasley, the first dogs, were Christmas celebrities. Every year they starred in the Barney Cam videos, little comedic White House holiday movies that became a national tradition of their own. George loved it. Christmas Eve was very private. The Bush often attended services at Camp David or our local church in Washington. Laura treasured the reading. George loved the music. After church, they spent the evening like any other family, relaxing, exchanging small gifts, enjoying small food, and phoning far-flung relatives. On Christmas Day, they would travel to Camp David, which gave them a chance to be more anonymous and unplugged. George could hike, bike. Laura would settle in it with a book near the fireplace. They called military members stationed abroad, a tradition George took very seriously, sometimes spending hours encouraging and sending heartfelt thanks to the military abroad. The Bushes thought Christmas was a solemn time, remembering service members and spending the holiday far from home. Laura's food, her menu is also very traditional turkey dressing. They had a cook from the White House that prepared the meal at Camp David, same as like the Eisenhowers. The Johnsons were more Texas Christmas celebration. For breakfast, the Bush family usually had cinnamon rolls, scrambled eggs, sausage, strong Texas coffee. Jen and Barbara joked their dad drink coffee as it were a national security requirement. The Bushes liked lingering over their breakfast before opening gifts, with Barney and Miss Beasley circling the wrapping paper like tiny furry inspectors. Christmas dinner varied, but it almost always had a roast turkey or beef tenderloin, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread. Laura added elegance and holiday salads and had a perfectly set table. George always made sure there was extra gravy. If they were Camp David, the kitchen staff would sometimes prepare one of George's favorites, pecan-crusted trout or a Texas-style barbecued brisket. Christmas in the Bush White House was grand, glowing, and beautifully decorated. You could smell the cinnamon, the tamales, the Texas coffee, making it feel like a real Texas Christmas. And Barney, that's their little dog. He has a little chapter too, after Millie's. He had to write one. And he says, if anyone thought the White House was run by presidents, they clearly hadn't met Barney Bush, first dog, self-appointed director of Christmas operations, and the only creature in Washington who never needed Congress to approve his decisions. Barney's mission was every December, Laura Bush transformed the White House into a Christmas wonderland. She loved the tradition and themes that sounded like children's books, Home for the Holidays, Season of Stories, Holiday in the National Parks. But Barney believed everything should really be called Christmas, but make it about the dog. Laura's peaceful decorating versus Barney's creative direction. Laura would gently place a handcrafted ornament on a branch. Barney would remove it, carry it to another room, replace it with a tennis ball. Barney, Laura would say. He'd sigh back and say, I'm improving the vibe, Mom. George wandered in and out of the decorating chaos, often cheerful, but questionable assistance. Hey, Laura, why don't you put the tree over there? George, that's a doorway. Oh, right. Well, maybe a little tree. Barney followed him faithfully, and he mostly adored George. And George dropped snacks more frequently than any other world leader in history. Each year, the Bushes filmed Barney Cam, a holiday video series starring Barney exploring the White House decorations. Barney believed this was a documentary about his heroism. Everyone else knew it was a national proof that not the president, but the dog was the real Christmas icon. The 2000 theme provided comfort to the national grieving after 9/11, which was Home for the Holidays. And one of Laura's famous recipes was her cowboy cookies. She didn't have as many famous recipes as it's funny how food changed though. It's not really fair to say like Lady Bird had the most famous recipes, because the food really, studying this showed me how the food has evolved. Like when Johnson was president, there's like Poncho's Mexican restaurant or something. And now it's really popular. And so there was a lot more Mexican food in the White House with the Bushes, George W. Bush. So that's a little bit about that. And then I had one really funny thing. I was going to see if you could guess what president said what. It's my pollen notes. Does anybody have any questions about any of this?
I was wondering where Eisenhower's library is.
My mom and I went to Eisenhower's. It's Iowa. Is that the one we saw in Iowa? Yeah.
Oh.
We're trying to. My mom and I are trying to see all of them.
Oh wow.
We only lack a few.
I'll add that I toured the Eisenhower house at Gettysburg, where he lived after he left the presidency. And the kitchen was that god awful 1950s turquoise.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
If you go down to the Johnson Ranch,
Oh, yeah. That
their
is-
kitchen is, I think it's kind of that gold color.
it's very-
Is
And
it
they were
open now?
so, I don't know how they got
Is the
much
ranch
done in
open now?
those kitchens. There
Oh,
was
it's
so
been
little
closed
space to work.
Couple years.
I mean, supposedly like when,
That's how they grew up.
I guess so, when
Mm.
Kennedy was shot, he was supposed to come to
Oh,
he was, that part of his deal was to go down to the Johnson Ranch on Pertinalis. And they made like in that little kitchen, like 23 pies, pecan pies or something for that evening. And when the cooks, they were working so hard in the kitchen for Kennedy to come to Texas and come to the ranch for this big barbecue.
See if the house is
And they
open.
were like, what are we gonna do with all this
It's open,
food?
but-
They say, what am I gonna do with my pies? I mean, they could turn out so much food out of those little kitchens. It was really amazing. But yeah, the color's pretty god awful.
I mean,
Okay.
everything.
when's it gonna
Yeah.
open?
Refrigerator,
Closed a couple
the
years.
stove, I think the countertops were that really nice linoleum.
Yeah, I'm
Oh.
linoleum.
It was right out of the fifties.
Yeah,
And have you made any of the recipes?
I have. I've made quite a few. One of my favorites actually, one is Zephyr's, his cook, shrimp dish. And then the cookies, cowboy, or there's a Wheaties cookie that they made.
Wheaties.
I made, and there's hot Spanish casserole's good. Yeah, I made a lot of them actually. And then it was kind of fun. Like a year or so ago, out in Steiner Ranch, is Longhorn Village, they did a whole thing on LBJ, and they hired this couple that acted like him and did a
Really? Wow.
little show for us. But they had asked me to come out there and talk about my book, and they chose the menu based on the book. But with the Wheaties cookies, my mom and I didn't do this. We made it. We thought it was a great idea. They kind of smushed them up and like maybe use like an ice cream scoop. They had these really huge cookies. So the
Huh.
Wheaties cookies in here, that's what I would do. I would smush the Wheaties more.
Wow.
Lace cookies, they were really good. The shrimp curry a la Zephyr Wright, that's the one I made a lot.
Mm.
I think I add more turmeric to it, but it's really good. And so, like a lot of the recipes back then too, they didn't use all the spices we use now.
Mm.
It was pretty basic food. I mean,
That's how I grew up.
food's come a long way.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until I started reading these recipes how they were just so basic. Okay, so now that I gave you a little sample of what each president was sort of like, I know you'll know who said this. Okay, so I'm going to read it. You can just shout it out. Some folks look at me and see a certain swagger. In Texas, we just call it a
George
walk-in.
W.
George W. How has retirement affected my golf game? People ask me. A lot more people beat me now. Eisenhower.
Mm.
This is kind of a funny one. Actually, I have two from this. Okay. Being president is like being a jackass in a hailstorm. There's nothing to do but stand there and just take it. LBJ, yeah.
Kind of like him.
If one morning I walked on top of the water across the Potomac River, the headline that afternoon would read, President can't swim.
Is that LBJ?
LBJ.
Yeah.
There's so many things he said. It was so it's just like me. When he would have meetings in the Oval Office, he could be in the middle of a thought and have to use the bathroom. And have his paper. Come on, boys, follow me, and take them right into the bathroom. And he'd leave the door open. He'd be sitting on the toilet, looking at it and saying, "Okay, you do this, you do that." Just, I mean, the guy had no peace. Okay. I have opinions on my own, strong opinions, but I don't always agree with them. That's H.W. Bush. There are so many from LBJ, though, they're funny, but I just thought that one I didn't put that in my book, that he like, that being president, like being a jackass in Hellstone. So that's kind of the highlights that I picked out. I do have some of the recipes with me. You know, and I was telling Ellen I was going to try to Xerox them, but I didn't. But if anybody wants any, maybe somehow I could just email them or something, or
We can do that. Send them out.
well, I had this set of little index cards of Lady Bird's favorite recipes, and they sold it at the store, the LBJ store. And I don't think they have them this year, but I was thinking I could get a set of that and just, you know, scan them all in and send them to anybody if they're interested. Baking at the ranch, LBJ Ranch, was a really big deal. Every Christmas season, the peaches from the surrounding area, the Fredericksburg peaches, Lady Bird loved those, and she froze a bunch and made pies. And you know, I don't know how they got some of this food to DC, but she loved it all. She loved sharing Texas food and recipes with people in DC, and apparently they loved it all back. So I'll also show you this. So one of the things people ask me about this book is, well, you know, they're like, well, does Linda or Lucy know about that book? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But then summer before last, Melissa's here. Through Marion, a friend of Melissa's, she knows Lucy. And so Marion said we could all have lunch together. Melissa, me, Marion, and Lucy Johnson. And I was like, wow, that would be really exciting. And Marion, I think, said, well, your mom's got a lovely house in Westlake. You know, let's have it there. And I was like, oh, no. No. I would have to have a maid here for a week. I mean, no. She's like, you have a lovely home. And I remember, I think I ran it past Melissa. She's like, oh, no, mom has a lovely house in Westlake. I mean, she does. City view. It was really so. And I was like, oh, my God. So I was like, Mom, okay, we have a cleaning lady, but she doesn't come like twice a month. I was like, Mom, we got to get her here like days in advance. And we got to do the silver. And this is going to be a lot of work. I want to, we have to make it really nice. And I told Marion, and she's like, oh, Jean, the reason she wants to come is because we don't want anything from her. She's always invited to give a speech somewhere and give money somewhere. And people want something from her. We're just going to have a nice lunch. And I was like, okay, that made me feel a little bit better. So I still got some cinnamon polish. So anyway, she came, and it was perfect timing because she was moving. Her and Ian, her husband, were moving from. You remember where were they living, Melissa? So they moved to the.
They were Norwood Tower.
Norwood Tower.
Four Seasons.
4 Seasons. And so she had all this stuff she didn't want anymore. So she brought me some cookbooks and pins from the White House. And then I already had one of these, but I didn't tell her because I thought it was so sweet. This is the Johnson Christmas 2021 decoration. So I don't know if you're familiar with, but well, maybe not all of them. Most of the presidents have their own Christmas ornament designed for them. And you can get them online. You can probably just Google presidential Christmas ornament. But I have 3 or 4 of them. But the fact that she gave me this one, I thought that was really sweet. So she brought like a handful of stuff. I don't know. Does that sound like she brought this? Remember that book she bought? A cookbook from, gosh, someone way back then cooked a lot. Signed, autographed, so Lady Bird. It's a couple photos. But it was such perfect timing that she was moving and all the stuff she didn't want. And, to me, it was just like the greatest thing I own now. So it's true. Somebody's trash is someone's treasure.
I wanted to add
Yeah.
just how elegant that she had the table set.
Oh,
Jean and Julia. It was just charming beyond words. And she had each of the recipes on the table
Oh.
from her cookbook. And it was beautiful because that opened up conversation. So Lucy would see a recipe and then she would go into conversation about that recipe, which just added an extra element.
she was so generous with her time too.
Yeah.
I mean, she would tell a story about something with Lyndon, and then in the beginning, Marion said she probably only stayed about an hour. I was like, that's fine. So I did, I made 3 or 4 things out of the book. And then, I remember once we were in my mom's kitchen and her phone rang and I was like, I'm going to do this forever now. She goes, Lucy Johnson, I'm in a meeting now. Is this important? I'm going to start saying that. Does that make me feel important? You know, I feel important all of a sudden, Lucy Johnson. Is this important? Like I'm already doing something important. So she got rid of him, and that was the end of that. But she was so nice, and she would tell a story, and then she said, I got to go. And then she'd tell another story. I was, glued to her. And then she'd tell another story. I've really got to go. And I'm going to stand up a couple times. And then she'd say, okay, one more. And it's not like we were even asking for more stories. We were just so into it. And she stayed over 2 hours, probably 2.5. And Melissa brought a beautiful salad. It was really fun.
You told us about how Lady Bird was very important in giving some dignity to LBJ on occasion. What about the relationship with the daughters? Did you get any insight as to how they related to his rougher side?
Sort of. I mean, in my research, LBJ was, when he was VP and president, he was all about that. There was a wedding in the White House, 2 actually, both of his daughters. And I probably should have brought that up. Thank you, Ellen. Because one of them was around Christmas time, but apparently at one of the weddings, he kind of snuck back and started doing some business. I mean, it wasn't like they were really close, was my impression. He was all about business. And Lady Bird was all about LBJ.
Mm-hmm.
So, she doesn't have any sour grapes about it. They just don't talk about it very much. But that's what I just found when I was doing my research.
I received one of George and Barbara's Christmas cards. The Broad House School.
I bet you don't feel so special now.
Having a pretty good time living on the boardwalk in Newport Beach with a bunch of guys, including Robert Loper, my ex Westlake buddy and Baylor roommate who lived on Gentry right down the street from the Schulers in Rollingwood. And one of our buddies was a big lobbyist in DC. And so we got a beautiful Christmas card from George and Barbara. And we were so impressed with it that we put it up for many years on our wall of shame with some other not quite as distinguished items. And I'm sure I still have it at home. So
Yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad you're one of the 30,000 that have it. Mom might have done it. Anyway.
How did you decide which recipes to put in the book?
Well, I submitted to my editor every one I found, and my editor took out some. It was too many. So
You didn't
When my-
share, you illustrated all the recipes.
I did.
Yes, that's your illustration.
So I did all the drawing too, and that kind of came about in a side way because at first I was going to try to make a lot of the dishes and shoot for some photography or photograph them with just like an iPhone, and then I don't know, I think I started doodling around drawing it or something, and I thought, well, maybe that would be more fun.
why
So
don't you cook for us?
sorry.
Why don't you cook for us?
Oh, but- I usually bring. Last time I brought lemon cake. This time I didn't really bring anything. I think that time I spent on our garage sale we had on Buckeye Trail this weekend. I could have been cooking, but
And the stories that you brought up before about the nachos and how they were made and the toast with the gravy,
oh yeah,
those are kind of childhood memories if you grew up in this area. You more than likely had those at least once a week, for dinner. And
Right.
how they made the nachos.
yeah. The
back
nachos,
then.
I have a picture there too. So that was see that Mexican food has really evolved from back when Eisenhower. I mean, I don't think they had it in Eisenhower. Like I said, there's a Ponchos in Austin. That was kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
But what Melissa was saying, so it was a triangle chip with a little bit of cheese and a little slice of jalapeno. Yeah, that was it. I mean, I don't even know what they would think now if they were to see a pile of chips with all that goo all over it. You know, that might not pass. I don't know if LBJ would agree with that. Yeah, he liked corned beef. It was a military dish on toast, and it had a nickname: "Shit on a Shingle." Yeah. But I have a lot of things torn out. I put in the back on my table. So like this was, I think this was one of the Bush's White House things. I mean, it's amazing like how many trees and 30-foot trees are decorating the White House, 40-foot trees. This was the Bush's card in 2003. I'll put these in the back. 2004. There's one of Lady Bird's favorite color is yellow. So there's one of her and portrait of her with the yellow dress on. When she found out that she could wear a blue dress and then the photographer could change it to a yellow dress, that made her real excited. So this talks a little bit, 20-foot white pine, 16-foot tree. There's 6 of them. I mean, they all had so many different trees. I just didn't know where to begin talking about the trees. But this is the letter that I was telling you about. Bess Abel wrote about the cookies. Well, I'll just go real fast. The cookies you made for the white. This is for Mrs. Rice. She made the gingerbread boys on the tree. The cookies you made for the White House Christmas tree were such a hit with children from 3 to 83. I wonder if you would consider making a few for our 1965 tree. After one children's party, I noticed a missing leg from the ginger boy hanging on a lower branch. On closer inspection, I could see tiny teeth marks left by the nibbler. You'll be able to add this tree to our tree. We'd be very grateful. So apparently every year they were nibbled off legs and arms. Yeah, that was kind of cute.
How old was Lady Bird when they met?
She was like 18. Her mother died when she was 3. And her dad had the corner store in Karnak. So she was kind of grown up of her age, just kind of what I'm getting at. She was really young.
How'd they meet?
Kind of a blind date sort of thing. Lyndon met her, took her to the Driscoll Hotel, tried to, impress her. And after one date, he knew he wanted to marry her. She wasn't quite so fast on him. But she did take him home to meet her dad. Her dad said, well, Lady Bird or Claudia, you usually bring home boys for me to meet. He finally brought home a real man. There was some of the back talk to that because she did have money and he didn't. That he might have seen some political connection.
And how old was he?
I don't remember now. I don't remember. They got married in San Antonio and he bought her.
That's right.
He bought a ring at like Sears, I think. Some little cheapo ring. Anyway,
No, right there.
they were a hoot, and LBJ was a complete hoot. But thank goodness for Lady Bird, like I said, kept his feathers a little unruffled some of the time because he was rough on people. I mean, I read this Johnson treatment he gave people. He, grab a man by the tie and pull him right up and say, you were going to vote for that bill. They just leave, covered with spit when they're finished on it. So anyway.
Did you say he was 6 feet tall?
He's a little over 6, I
Because
think.
I would have guessed taller. All the pictures in the
I think,
LBJ
yeah.
Museum have him.
I think he was a
It's
little.
interesting you say that
little
because he
over
had
6.
short arms. And so he had he was very, he didn't like all, he had short arms, so he had his tailor make his shirts. So the sleeves came like to here, like they were too short.
Oh my God.
No, and if you go to the library, there's the phones, you can listen to the tapes. There's one talking to his tailor, how he needs more room in the crotch area. 'Cause he's got a big.
Oh my God.
I mean, all the clothes made and did all sorts of tricks to try to be taller, arms on or short sleeves and
He was 6'4". I just looked it
a
up. He
little
was
bit
6'4".
baggy down here.
I don't know why he thought he needed to be taller than that.
He didn't miss a beat on.
Yeah.
And the Lady Bird podcast is remarkable. The one
Yes.
done by the
Yeah,
drag,
listen to it.
it's very worth listening to.
Is it at the LBJ Museum?
No,
No,
it's-
it's just on the podcast, just pull it down, and it's Lady Bird and it's a picture of her in the fields. Yeah, but it's so well done.
Yeah, I mean, once I started reading about the research library, it's on the 10th floor of the museum. It's incredible. I mean, it's funny things.
Downtown on the UT campus,
East Campus.
East Campus of UT.
And anyone can research there. You have to have a project that you're going to research. You get a special card. But anybody can use it. They're really particular. I mean, like you can bring in a pencil and a pen and a computer or something. Because I think it was the Eisenhower Library many years ago. Somebody stole a bunch of stuff that was signed by Eisenhower by like taking paper. This is what I was told. They would take like papers he signed, like roll them like this and put them up their sleeve. So they called on a lot of stuff had been stolen.
Oh.
So since it's these libraries are
And the Bush Library,
it's an A&M HW, and if you go there, you can see where he's buried and Barbara, and then they brought the sister that died.
Josepha.
They moved it. They there's a name for that. What's they call you? Bring them back from you pick them up and put them.
Big Sue?
Big Zoom.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly. So she's there, and then, but it's kind of a separate little garden. It's got a big pond. They're really beautiful.
have you been to Reagan?
Yes,
Library?
that's the best, in my opinion.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, the big.
The Air Force One
One.
jet. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's in the building.
And they got a piece of Berlin.
They tried
Oh,
for
wow.
many years to get something, the plane for the LBJ. I think it was the one he was signed to go in. It's in Seattle at Boeing, and it brings in a lot of money for visitors there. So obviously, it's really famous. But they tried really hard to get it, bring it to the LBJ library. You know where the big fountain is at the library? They were going to try to just like make that a big round, tall, like full of cement, and just put it right there. But they just can't get it because Boeing's they want all that money that people come in. So they'll probably never get it. Yes,
So his sister was named Josepha Johnson,
yes.
and she died out of the ranch in around 1961, something like that. But the main thing I wanted to say is, did y'all know that Johnson had an apartment on the top floor of the
Yes.
federal building in downtown Austin?
Oh.
And they have preserved his apartment. And I got to visit it, and it's like stepping back into the 1960s.
Oh.
Is it in the library?
No,
Is it?
it's in the
Where's
federal.
the federal building?
It's the, I think it's called the Pickle Little Building.
I
and it's on
that was ever
like-
brought that up to me before.
It's almost as tasteful furnished as the Eisenhower. Almost.
What color is
Brown, probably.
Because there is a small apartment he had in the library, on the 10th floor. And it's brown, like it's not touched. It's really ugly.
Which of the Johnsons used to live up on top of Mount Laurel?
Oh, Jean Ladenburg, right? She had a
I'm
house
not
up
sure
there.
which one. Yeah,
Yeah, she lived up there.
next to the radio station.
Yeah, and she had another stroke. She had several strokes. She would come to the library because she lost her voice. She couldn't, so she would come in the library in a wheelchair. She couldn't. She'd wave, and she wanted to talk to somebody. She said, "Can you?" She was really charming.
Just gonna mention that the OBJ Range Air Force One plane tour.
Yeah, it's like Air Force
Oh, it's
Two.
range.
I think it's Air Force Two.
Yeah, I've seen that. I didn't know you could tour it though. I've never been in it. Oh, thank you.
Did they decorate the ranch very much for Christmas?
No, just that but see, that's another thing that's completely changed. Christmas lights. Even those big bulbs you screwed in, those big. Not that I've ever read Ellen. That was kind of primitive back then too.
Other questions?
Where did you get your pronunciation of Mrs. Eisenhower? Because when I was growing up in the fifties, there's argument over there. But when I grew up in the fifties, it was always Mamie.
Yeah, I've heard Mamie too.
So I.
Mamie is probably Mamie, Mamie, yeah.
That's what it was. Press.
Okay, you're right. No, you're right.
Now Eisenhower was born in Texas. What about Mamie or Mamie? Was she born in Texas?
I don't think she was born in Texas. I didn't get to that point. I didn't read that.
We do have copies of Jean's book. They are for sale back in the corner here. And you can ask her if she'll put her name on it.
So when they came out, so